Dear music lovers, welcome to this episode in conversation with Maestro David Whitwell. Today the episode title is On the Origins of Symbols for Dynamics. A warm welcome to Maestro David Whitwell. Hello, David.
Thank you very much. As you just heard, the topic for this discussion is about the little symbols that represent dynamics in performance. The lowercase p representing piano, and the lowercase f representing forte. Today, we teach students these symbols only as symbols of loud and soft. But when these symbols were first introduced in music, in the beginning of the 17th century, beginning of the Baroque period, and in Italy, by the way, they were used for a completely different purpose. They were used not just for loud and soft, but they were used to indicate emotional quality. And we hear this very clearly in a work by Michael Pretorius. Pretorius was a conductor and composer in Germany, and he wrote the best book ever written on the performance practice of early music. It's a series of 3 volumes called Syntagma Musicum, and volume 3 is all about performance practice. And here is what he wrote. Changes by the performer in dynamics are agreeable and popular to express the feeling of the music and to affect the spirit of the listener. This says nothing about loud and soft. In addition, at the same time, in the early 17th century, when these symbols were first used, they were left as symbols for the performer. It was not yet the time when it was the job of the composer to write these in. It was left to the performer. And for example, we find in an English writer, Christopher Simpson, 1659, he writes, "We play forte or piano according to our own desire," left to the player. And this is clearly evident in a report that we have of a member of the audience who heard Arcangelo Corelli in recital playing on his violin. And here's what this member of the audience wrote. Corelli, in his performance, his eyes will sometimes turn as red as fire. His face will be distorted. His eyeballs will roll around and sometimes turn as red as it can be. And he gives so much agony in his performance that he looks like he's not the same man. He looks like a different person. Now, all the things that this listener was impressed by are not found on paper. They were Corelli expressing the music. And this illustrates something that I tell all conductors to remember, that music is not found in the score. Music is found within yourself. And this is a perfect example. Corelli expressing all these things that he felt, none of which were on paper. Also at this time, it was felt that even if a composer wrote forte someplace, we teach this today almost like a road sign. If you see forte in the music, it means that everything from here on is forte. or everything from here on is piano, like a road sign. But at the time of the early 17th century, this was not the case. It was still expected that the player would have continuous alternation of dynamics during the music. And we have a wonderful illustration of this in a report of the performance of Bach. The person who heard Bach play wrote, "Anyone who has heard Bach play the clavichord must have been struck by the endless nuances of shadow and light that he cast in his performance." And again, none of those things are seen in the music of Bach. If you look at a printed score of Bach, you don't see crescendos and decrescendos and changes in dynamics. This is made even more clear by a contemporary Bach, Johann Quantz, in a treatise on the flute. And he specifically talks about places where the composer has marked one dynamic or the other. Quantz wrote this: "Even in sections marked by forte or piano, a constant play of light and shadow is what keeps the music alive for the listener." And that's a very interesting statement. In other words, otherwise the music is just dead symbols on paper. But Quantz is saying it's this constant change that makes the music actually come to life. Another point that I would like to discuss is what these words mean, piano and forte, in the Italian language. I have a very professional dictionary that has both Italian and English. It's written by Cassels. And when you look up forte in this Italian dictionary, what you find is a whole series of single words, definitions of forte. And they're all rather subjective and sometimes emotional in character. You read, for example, vigorous, powerful, healthy, large, high, angry. And it's only when you get to word number 12 that you read loud. It's pretty far down the list. And when you look up the word piano in my Italian dictionary, again, it's a series of single words, the first one of which is soft, and that's what all of us would expect. But the second word, as a possible definition, is gentle. Well, that's a characteristic quality and doesn't necessarily have to be associated with any particular dynamic level. But the real shock is the third word, the third definition of piano, and it is slow. Now that's really remarkable. If you think about your own private lessons with your teacher, and you're looking at a piece of music and there's a lowercase p, the teacher will always point to it and say, "Here, you're supposed to play soft." And never in your memory did a teacher point to that and say, "Here, you're supposed to play slow." And yet, when you think about it, when you think of all the symphonies that you know from the classical period and the Baroque period, all of the chamber music that you know from these periods, the second movement is invariably, it's always a slow movement. And if you look at the beginning of the second movement, what you will see is a small lowercase p. So in this case, the p tells you it's a slow movement. It does not tell you it's a soft movement. We would never say to a class of students, we're now going to hear the soft movement of Mozart's Symphony No. 40. We would say, we're going to hear the slow movement. But here's a case known to all of us where the little p means slow. And when this is doubled, when there are two little p's, which we call pianissimo, in my Italian dictionary, it gives two definitions. One is very soft, but the other definition is very slow. And this definition was the one used by Mozart. Mozart had 3 long residences in Milano, and that's where he learned his Italian. And so if you look at all the works of Mozart, every one of them, of which about 600 still exist, never anywhere does Mozart write retard. Instead, he writes piano in a cadence to mean slow up the music. Or if he uses 2 pianissimo, he means very slow, molto retard. And this same principle carries forward into the music of Schubert. I had once a discussion with Dr. Dürr in Germany, who was president of the Schubert Society in Germany, and he told me that in the works of Schubert, if Schubert wrote out the word diminuendo, he also meant, in 90% of the time, he also meant slow up the music. He wrote diminuendo, but he meant allargando. So this brings to mind, next to me, how have we lost contact with this? How is it today that we only teach loud and soft, and all of these other expressive ideas we don't hear about today? Well, I think part of the explanation may lie in the inventions of music contests, which began in the early 19th century. In a music contest, you're judged on how you observe the things on paper. So if it says soft, then the question is, who can play the softest? Or if it says allegro, the question is, who can play the fastest? But nowhere in a music contest is the question ever asked, who was the most musical? Now, I had an experience with this in 1990. In 1990, I was engaged to be the president of the jury for an international piano competition that was held in Italy. And as one of the judges, my job was to represent the general ordinary listener. The other 11 judges were all famous piano teachers. Well, we judged these performances like 12 Roman emperors. If we liked the performance, we did thumbs up. If we did not like the performance, we did thumbs down. There were no written comments, no comments of any kind. It was just up or down. And if it was up, that contestant went to the next round. If it was down, it meant you're out, pack your suitcase, go home. And it seemed tragic to me because in some of these pieces, you like pianists from China or from Japan maybe spent 6 months working on the music of this competition, but suddenly they're told, go home. Well, there came a contestant, a young woman from Finland, and she played a complete Beethoven sonata. And it was absolutely beautiful. Just a beautiful performance. And of course, I did thumbs up. But all the other judges, the piano teachers, were thumbs down. And I was very astonished at this. And a little later, during an intermission, I pulled aside one of the other judges, who was a man I had met several years earlier in Argentina. His name was Hector Morales. He was a professional pianist. And I asked him, Hector, how can you explain to me how this wonderful performance, musical performance, got thumbs down from all the judges except myself? And Hector looked kind of surprised at the question. And then he said, well, competitions in piano have nothing to do with music. Well, with that thought, I will conclude by making the observation that I think all musicians today should consider the broader implications of these symbols, the lowercase p and the lowercase forte. And like the case of the 17th century, we should think of these symbols as symbols of the experience of the heart and not symbols of the experience of science. And with that, I say thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Maestro. As always, we suggest to our audience to check it out, your wonderful new book on Mozart. And there is a very interesting chapter on page 119 devoted to these topics. Thank you again to Maestro David Whitwell, as always, illuminating and a great friend of the Major TV. See you for the next episode in Conversation with Maestro. See you soon. Bye.